Hi, everyone. Walt Rakowich here. As most of you know, I'm the former Chief Executive Officer of Prologis and an author of a book called Transfluence. It's about the opportunity that we all have to make a transformative influence in the lives of those that we serve. I'm back again this month for another live chat with some of the most thoughtful voices, guiding leaders to be more human and more effective. And today, I have with me a really good friend of mine, Cheryl Bachelder. And Cheryl and I were together on the CEO Forum. Cheryl's still in the CEO Forum, and as am I. And she has an amazing background. Let me just tell you a few things. Number one, she's the former CEO of Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen, a position that she held for 10 years. When she took over the company in 2007, the company had been through 4 CEOs in the previous 7 years, and the stock had slid by over 60% during that time. 10 years later, the stock had risen by over 500% under her leadership, and the rest is history. I'll let her tell a little bit more about the story. She did an amazing job. She's a board member at US Foods and Chick-fil-A. By the way, awesome sandwiches. Keep making those great Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches. They're fabulous. I just had one yesterday.
I did too.
She previously held the positions of president and chief concept officer for KFC, vice president of marketing and product development at Domino's Pizza, and general manager of the Lifesavers division at RJR Nabisco. Her earlier career also included brand management positions at Gillette and Procter & Gamble. And then a few years ago, she authored a book called Dare to Serve: How to Drive Superior Results by Serving Others, which I love. It's an excellent book, and it's about the importance of serving others in leadership. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Cheryl, great to have you on the line.
Thank you, Walt. Good to be with you.
Super to be with you. And you have had a really, really impressive career. You've worked in a lot of roles with a number of brand companies. All these companies we all know. Unlike Prologis, many years people used to say to me, "Well, who's Prologis?" Well, no, everybody knows all the brands that you've worked for. And in your book, you talk about the importance of leadership, and in particular, servant leadership. But before we get to that, I'd like to find out what people in your life have been influential to you. The most influential to you in your leadership journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I love the question. There's a positive side of this and maybe an alternative side of the question. The positive for me is I had an incredible, gifted, loving father who was a business executive and a successful one. He was both skilled for the work and he was a values-based leader. And he was so transparent. You use that word a lot, Walt. That was my dad. He did not hesitate to teach his family what he was doing in the workplace and leadership and how he made decisions. And so he gave me tremendous insights, almost by osmosis, as he shared these stories as we grew up. A second one was my grandmother. She co-led a dairy farm with my grandfather in northern Indiana. And she was a working mother before that word existed, right? It wasn't a contemporary idea. It was just her life. And I learned so much and modeled so much of my life after that woman who got up at dawn to milk the cows and never rested until they ran out of electricity, basically. She was one hard-working, talented, people-oriented leader long before it was cool. So my father and my grandmother, 2 single biggest positive influences. Now, what I want to touch on here, though, is everybody always asks me who my mentor was in the workplace. And I say this: I was mentored by a notebook where I wrote down what not to do. I was mentored by a notebook where I wrote down what not to do. The most influence on my leadership in the marketplace was making a conscious decision about what kind of leader I wanted to be and not be And frankly, it was more compelling to me to be motivated by those who I did not want to be. And I grew up during Enron, Qualcomm, Walcom. Yeah, I grew up during the ethical collapse of many major business corporations. I didn't want to be like them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really a mentoring, driving part of my development as a leader, was to decide who I would be and who I would not be.
And you actually journaled about that, or you wrote
Absolutely.
down things that you didn't want to be by watching leaders that you did not want to be.
Yes.
That is very interesting, and I think there's something to be said for something to be said for journaling, because when you write it down, you actually visualize it, and I think you remember it. At least I do. I remember it better.
Well, and there's something about writing down the problems you're having with a boss, right? As opposed to walking around and whining about them all day long. Get constructive about it and say, here's what I'm learning from this person that I can apply in my leadership, right? Because most of us complain about bad bosses. Not so helpful. Apply what you learned. Use it.
Well, I love that. And just as an aside, my dad for me was probably the most influential in my life, and he was a business person too. But we didn't talk about business that much around the table, but it was the way that he treated people in his life that actually made an impact on me. It's very interesting how parents do matter.
Absolutely.
So in 2007, Cheryl, you were asked to lead a company that was in trouble. Profitability had fallen. Several leaders, as I mentioned before, had preceded you. Morale was negative. Franchise owners had become disenfranchised, if you will. Investors were losing patience. Stock down 60% over a 7-year period of time. That's tough. Many people, in my view, would have chosen to pass on the job and just say, no, that's not something I don't want to take over this. Are you kidding me? I may be the 5th CEO, right? And who knows how long the line would be. And yet you chose to run toward it as opposed to run away from it. Why?
Well, first of all, you're right. The facts of the matter are many people did turn down the job. I was not the first choice of the board. I was sitting on the board at the time, unusual. And it's only because some really talented people said no that they finally turned and asked me. But, I do think I was prepared for that moment. I developed a long resume of helping turn around iconic, venerable brands that had fallen off their game. And so it was and is a sweet spot, a favorite thing that I like to do, is to bring businesses back to life that deserve to be back to life. I had the opportunity from the board seat to know that the brand was still powerful. The commitment of the franchise owners was still a powerful asset. And really, we were just off our game. And it was time to go back to the basics and get back to the story. But it wasn't the business opportunity that drew me to this job. I had had those opportunities before. What attracted me to this job is this is the first time I had a platform to build a case for servant leadership. That was why I took the job. And looking back, I don't think I ever told the board that. It was a quiet missional thing in me that I wanted to be a leader of a company who demonstrated that servant leadership drives superior results because it creates a place where people thrive and perform their best work. But I really wanted to be a teacher of that through action, not words. I really wanted to bring it to life in a case study. And sometimes to prove something, you have to take an opportunity that everyone else sees as a dead end. And I have no regrets about taking that job. It was everything that I had hoped it would be.
Isn't that interesting? They say that sometimes adversity is your greatest opportunity.
Yes.
And by the way, I found the same thing in 2008, 1 year later at Prologis, my best opportunity. Although I have to admit, I struggled to take over. I struggled whether or not I had the chops to do it. And I'm sure you did too. But the servant leadership thing, you don't need to tell the board that if you're confident that you know how to lead and that by leading, you can produce results, which you did. And that's
importantly, I did have fear. I mean, the year that we launched our turnaround plan was the fall of 2008. It wasn't, as you recall, all that great of a season, financial collapse of the country.
Right.
And so there were many points of fear and trembling about our ability to make success happen. But I'll tell you what, knowing why you're doing something, this cause, this passion I had for teaching the next generation servant leadership carried me through the fear points.
That's great. In one of your first meetings, you talk about this in your book with the management team at the Buckeye Club in Atlanta. You had a conversation about what good leadership looked like. And you decided with your team that your purpose was to inspire servant leaders, just what you said. Now, many CEOs would say, look, our purpose is to put the customer first, or our purpose is, to double the size of the company in the next 3 to 5 years. It's put things into financial terms. And you said, no, our purpose is to inspire servant leaders. In other words, you'll get the other things will come, but that's our purpose. I'm kind of curious, how did your management team first react to that? Because that's an unusual purpose in most businesses, I would think.
Right.
And how did you pick it in the first place?
Yeah, we definitely built the idea together. It was not something I wrote on the chart and said, together we're going to do this because I said so. The first thing we did at that meeting is we did this exercise I described from my journal on flip charts. I had the team write down the descriptive words for their best bosses and their worst bosses. And you can do this in any team or leadership role that you have. It's really compelling to have people articulate for themselves what great leadership is. And you know what? People know. This isn't something you have to explain to them. They've experienced great and they've experienced bad. So we put all those words on the board. In fact, we privately put some names on those flip charts that I won't repeat, but we said, don't want to be like that, do want to be like this, and describe and start talking about the differences. And one of our leaders said, I think there is a leadership approach I've read about somewhere. I think it's called servant leadership. And he was the only one, this was a long time ago, the only one that had an iPhone. So he Googled servant leadership and he goes, yeah, look, there is an idea we could rally around. And of course, I said, Robert Greenleaf and Max Dupree and Bill Pollard. There were a lot of leaders that about 40 years ago thought this was a good idea. But the idea had gone stale. And so we talked about, would we like to bring that idea to life and kind of reprove that it was a powerful path to delivering performance results? And there was a lot of excitement about it. I would say the single thing that we could come to complete alignment on is we were really sick of self-absorbed leaders, that the purpose of their leadership was their resume build, their financial wealth build, their magazine cover, whatever. We were really tired of them. And we really wanted to say, we weren't sure we were any better than them. Don't get me wrong, because we're not, we're humans. But we said, we want to aspire to be better than that. And we said, we think we'll probably be okay if we create this environment where all the people thrive and win. And so kind of the idea we came up with is that how we would lead would determine the quality of our performance results. So the sentence, as you said, it was to inspire servant leaders to achieve superior results. We bookended the ideas. We said it will be servant leadership is the how, but superior results is the what. And only because of both of those points will we have credibility to tell our story of creating a thriving, successful workplace.
It's interesting you'd say that because, I write in my book about the importance of humility, and you do too in your book. And somebody came up to me one time after I gave a speech and said, I don't know about humility as a leadership characteristic. I mean, does that really get results? Can you make tough decisions being a humble person and a servant leadership and those sorts of things? You talked about in your book the importance of creating a daring destination, making tough decisions. and setting something bold and courageous and exciting and a vision for the business. And in one example, you proposed a pretty expensive national advertising program to your franchisees. And you said, look, we're doing some form of regional advertising. We need to make this big. We need to spend more money. Likely, we need to do it on a national stage. I think this is, it's a bold move, but I think this is the right decision. They came back and said, well, yeah, if your company, you as a franchise or kicks in $6 million, which is a big number at the time, and you had to go back to your board, get that approved, and ultimately you did, and you made a tough decision, and as it turned out, you convinced them that you were right. Sales grew. The interesting thing to me is that this is tough. It's tough leadership. It's courageous. And a lot of people don't connect servant leadership and humility and all of that with, having to make tough decisions and do hard things. And they almost seem like two separate things. Can you explain? And I think you said in there that they are actually connected. That being courageous and creating a daring destination is in fact servant leadership. Can you connect those dots?
Absolutely. First, to your point, almost everybody, when they first hear of servant leadership, think it's weak-kneed, lacking confidence. You're probably a doormat if you lead that way. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So the operating definition for me is dare to serve leadership is a leader who has the courage to lead the team to a daring destination, yet the humility to ensure their success in getting to that destination, to walk alongside, to prepare, to coach, to help, to guide. Two things that I think when you hear them, it'll feel more obvious. A galvanizing part of being a team is to chase a bold vision, a bold destination, to go somewhere important together, right? We don't get galvanized by small ideas.
Right.
And so the first responsibility, I think, of a leader, whether it's a project team or a corporation, leadership at any level, any position of influence, is to call out, there's something worthy to do here. For us, the worthy at Popeyes was we called out, we were going to be a top tier restaurant chain in America, and we called out the goals, and we said we would have to change our menu, our product innovation, our speed of service, our unit economics, the profitability of a restaurant. We would have to boldly change those, move those into the top tier for the first time in our history to perform. But that was galvanizing. We knew where we wanted to go, why it was important, and who would win if we got there. By the way, the franchise owners, the most important people in our business model, would have won if we hit those goals. So a galvanizing, daring destination is essential. Then this humility is, as the leader, then to pivot to the stewardship responsibility you have to come alongside that team and set them up for success, create an environment, a culture, a way of working, to be available for coaching and preparation. Those are the ways a leader becomes humble, takes themselves out of the picture for the sake of bringing the team along. Now, let me give you a visual picture. I'm a visual learner, so I have to have these pictures. I studied a piece of research on extreme sports. These are things crazy athletes do, right? Which I don't understand. I'm not a crazy athlete. But if I just take one example, extreme mountaineering, like climb Mount Everest. You have a picture in your mind, right? The galvanizing, daring destination is to get to the top of Mount Everest alive. And that's important, alive, because many people have tried and have not gotten there in one piece. So, galvanizing idea. But think about if you're asked to take a team to the top of Mount Everest, what is your next job after picking that destination? It is to prepare them, to train them, to make sure they bring the right equipment, to make sure they learn the weather patterns on the mountain. There is a long list of leadership responsibilities that you have to set them up for success, including protecting them from their own idiot decisions on the path, right? Corral them back. Tell them, no, you're too tired to hike. No, your oxygen levels are too low, right? Some hard feedback. along the path to the daring destination. But what you never lose sight of is that you are for getting them to the destination, right? So if you give them tough feedback, if you realign the team or put new people on the team or take former people off the team, it's all for the sake of the enterprise reaching that destination, not for self-interest. And Jeff Henderson has a wonderful book called For. What would it be like to lead? What would leaders be like in America if they were for the enterprise, not themselves? I think it's a turning point idea for leaders to say, I work for you, not you work for me.
So true. I say the tagline in my book, it's not about you. And I think you and I both talk about Rick Warren in our book, Rick
Right.
Warren, Purpose-Driven Life. That's really the central tenet of that book. And it's so true. You also say in your book that it's a leader's responsibility to bring purpose and meaning to the work of the organization. This is sort of something you're talking, I think, a lot about right now. And I say that same thing in Transfluence. And so can you, and we all crave meaning, I think.
Mm.
And so can you talk a little bit more about that responsibility as well?
Well, I think there's been a plethora of books and conversations and podcasts about purposeful work. My book includes 2 chapters on the topic. Having purpose about your work, finding meaning in your work is a powerful, big idea. But most people have not really thought about it on a personal level. I would share with you that I developed, it's been a long time ago, but I developed what I call a theology of work. Now, for me personally, it's guided by some faith principles, but I'd encourage you to ask yourself whether you have a theology of work. What do you believe that you want to show up in your leadership at work? Unique design and purpose. And so everything I think about when it comes to individuals that I meet with is they are uniquely created for a reason, and I'm here to figure it out and put them in the right place to express those gifts and capabilities. And that's incredibly motivating to me. I also believe that work was intended for good. Now, unfortunately, humans got a hold of work, and we've messed up some things. The workplace is not always good. It's full of problematic things, but it was intended for good. So I love being a leader who's, one of many. I'm not, we all have this opportunity. We have an opportunity to restore the workplace to good. I'm very motivated by that, right? So I would ask you, what motivates you? What are your beliefs, your values, your principles that motivate you to get up and go to that workplace and make something fabulous happen for the people that have been entrusted to your care? If you don't have a theology, the only one that doesn't know that is you. Because if you're an aimless leader, your people all know that. They know you. You're the only one that doesn't know that you're aimless. So I urge you to do the hard personal journey work of finding your purpose and your principles for leadership. Mine is motivated by a quote I found many years ago. Dr. Max Stackhouse said this. He said, increasingly, business leaders will be the stewards of civilization. For some reason, I read that and I didn't sleep for 3 days. It was a galvanizing thought for me. It was a scary but energizing thought that if the other institutions in society failed to develop leaders of competence and character, it would fall on the leaders of business institutions to do that for society. And I went, oh my goodness, I think I'm going to be one of the people that's going to work on that piece of it. Because boy, I don't want us to get to a point where we don't have leaders of competence and character for all of our institutions, right? The family, the government, the community, the educational institutions, and the workplace.
I think that's a beautiful thing to say. And, I used to always say too, that, it's interesting. We probably spend 2/3 of our waking hours at work.
Right.
So we better make it right. And plus we take home a lot of what we do at work when you think about it. And so I just think it's just a tremendous thing that you as a leader come and think about, how do you bring that responsibility? How do you bring that meaning and purpose to your people? Because I think it changes their lives over time. It's incredibly influential to them.
I so agree.
So just another question, people ask me this all the time. You talked about guiding principles. Every company has guiding principles, at least they say they do. And, yours were passion, listening, learning continuously, being fact-based, developing your people, being accountable, valuing humility. All those things I think are critically important. But you mentioned earlier in this that you watched leaders that didn't do those things, right? You watched Enron, for example. They're the poster child of the company that had a great mission statement and great values, but didn't live them out. How in fact do you get your people to live them? It's one thing to put it down in a mission statement, but how do you get your people to live them?
Yeah, I call this the problem with plaques. Plaques don't have any principles. They sit idle on the wall. Only the people of your organization live out any purpose or principles. So plaques are actually dangerous, just as you described. Every company has them, and very few companies live out the purpose and principles on their plaque. We actually had a conscious conversation about this, that we would not put up plaques until we thought we were living our purpose and principles. We eventually came up with a really pretty plaque, but it was 3 years down the road. So I want to give you something really concrete and tangible here, because I want you to have something to do differently when you're given this opportunity. We decided that the only way you change people's behavior was to set very clear expectations about not just their business goals, right? Their MBOs, if you call them that in your company, but also how we expected them to work. So we took the performance review, which in the past had only said, do these projects, hit these numbers, you win. And we broke it in half and said, okay, there's projects and deliverables you have, and there's how you work. And we defined expectations for how you work based on these 6 values. You got a rating on both your deliverables and your how you work. And to make sure you were paying attention, the first year we did this, we weighted it 60% towards how you work and 40% towards your deliverables. So you could not get a good performance rating if you were not operating by our principles. It was really concrete. It was, you got a really good set of feedback at your annual review about where you stood on the principles. It helped us quickly differentiate which leaders were with us on the path and which leaders really needed to reevaluate their own purpose and principles and decide if they wanted to take this trip. So really concrete, if you don't change your expectations and give feedback against them, people's behavior does not change. We also built supporting resources. We had a leadership class called Leadership from the Heart to help you develop your approach to your work and your commitment. We trained in coaching and delegation so you could help others. We gave awards around those 6 principles at the annual company meeting, and the person who was voted the servant leader of the year would often walk on the stage with tears streaming down their face. They'd never thought that they'd ever be recognized in such a way by their peers. Wow. For quietly doing the right things, right? These were not traditional heroes. These were quiet heroes in the organization. And so make these things very concrete in your expectations and the way you role model and give feedback in the organization.
Did you do 360-degree evaluations, or how did you find out if somebody was acting this way, or was it just up to the supervisor to find out?
Well, just as on a concrete deliverable, like get your project done on time, you take feedback from the team and say, how did the project go? Where were the snafus? Why are we ahead or behind? Same thing on how you work. The team feedback usually does bubble up pretty naturally. We did something called a talent review where all the director levels spoke together about the deliverables we've done together that year. And we talked about specific leaders and specific examples of those who lived out these principles and those who needed to grow and develop on the principles. It was pretty wide open conversation. And as a result, our directors, VPs, and above understood they were part of the solution. They were part of developing this perspective in people and giving people both good feedback and challenging feedback to have them move. I'll give you a very specific example of how candid you have to be with people. So we had this, environment that was supposed to be such a warm, candid, good place to work. And one of the leaders on my team was pretty routinely yelling at their executive assistant for any number of things and creating a really negative energy in their work group. And she often ended up in tears. And without waiting too long, I called that leader and said, I need to draw something to your attention. You're standing up in front of the company espousing these 6 principles, and then they're watching you yell at this executive assistant every day at 5 o'clock. What is congruent about that? Well, to be honest, at first he was a little huffy with me. He kind of did this, I've got this, I can handle it thing, and walked out. He came back the next morning and he would tell you the story. Said, oh my goodness, you held me accountable to congruent values and I was not operating out of congruence. And I need to fix that like now. It was a game-changing bit of feedback for him, not because he wanted to hear it, not because it was easy, but value congruence is something we very rarely talk about in the workplace, and we very rarely hold people accountable. And they walk around all day saying, I care about people, while they're beating up people. You got to talk about these things.
So the bottom line is really creating a system of accountability around all the principles that you set up in the first place.
Yes, and candid feedback and conversations.
Yep.
We're all trying to become better. Servant leadership is aspirational. The day you stand up in front of anybody and say, guess what? I'm a great servant leader. How does that sound? Not so good. And so I think the right mindset to have about servant leadership is we're all aspiring. We're all on a journey and we all need feedback to get better or to be better just today.
There's a question that just came in from the audience. How did you come to embrace servant leadership in the first place? Was there something that happened to you, Cheryl, in your life, in your career, or something like that really enabled you to embrace that in the first place?
Yes, it was my example or story around that would be I fell in love with the franchising business when I was working at Domino's Pizza. And interestingly enough, the day I arrived at Domino's, we had a class action lawsuit from our franchise owners. They weren't happy. And what I learned from that experience, I was charged with setting up an advisory council of franchisees to see if we could get past this conflict and get back to working together constructively. And what I learned from that was how to deeply care about and respect the business owners in a franchise model. They had everything invested. I had nothing invested. I was a hired hand, right? With, an MBA of all things. I was not anywhere near as committed. They had 20-year contracts and everything they owned invested. So it really caught my attention about the importance of understanding the people you serve and being careful, respectful, and a good steward of their business that your success was only measured by their success. And that it made sense to me. It is hard to do, right? Because we all think we have great ideas and great leadership opportunities. And if I could just convince you, you would be with me. But that process of bringing people with you is much harder than we want to think. And it comes out of listening carefully, building a fact base, sharing information, working collaboratively. I became quite passionate about that and found the tenets of servant leadership the most compelling way to work that I had seen or not seen in my career to that point.
That's great. All right. So I got to fast forward 10 years. 2017 comes. You receive an offer for $1.8 billion from Restaurant Brands to buy Popeyes at a 20% premium to the then current market value, and your board decides to take the offer. It meant that you and the members of your team would be asked to terminate your service with the company. The buyer thought they had it, and it's a company that you loved and the company you turned around 10 years later, and things are humming. I mean, 500% later from that stock price low, you'd completely turned around the company, and you're probably having fun. But it was the right thing to do for shareholders, according to the board. And they took the offer. You basically retired. How did you feel at that time about that? And did you still feel like you were able to accomplish your personal purpose at that point in time? Could you look back satisfied and say, yeah, I did what I was asked to do?
Well, I'll be completely transparent because that's what Walt expects. This was a really rough time for me because it came on suddenly. It was unexpected. I mean, our stock had gone from $11 to $61. You never dreamed that there was a higher price it could be. And so the offer was abrupt, unexpected. And of course, the board has a fiduciary responsibility. They have to look at the offer.
Right.
And so I was emotional. I was sad. I was scared, all those things. But let me clarify. I was not worried about the fact that the transaction would exit me, as it almost always does. The CEO almost always exits. Yeah. But here's what I was really worried about. I was worried about our purpose and principles exiting the building with the transaction.
Yep.
Because we had invested in teaching this. We had a culture, right? And it was driving that superior performance. And the sad thing was this potentially was going to break up the band, that team, right? That was having so much fun together. And we felt our work was unfinished. We felt it was unfinished. And so in the moment, I got some precious insight from my daughter, to be honest, unexpectedly as well. She sent me an email and she said, I want you to go read this essay by Tolkien. Now, I hadn't honestly read anything by Tolkien. The essay is called Niggle, and I'll make it a really short story for you. But Niggle is his whole life purpose is to paint a beautiful painting. But he dies suddenly short of getting to see the painting finished. When he gets to heaven, he learns that, in fact, there is a spectacular painting, and it is being finished. But until he got to heaven, he could not fully appreciate the beauty. And what this helped me understand is when you're called to leadership, you're called for a piece of the puzzle. You're called for a piece of the painting. And the end game is not yours to control or to define or to be responsible for. And it is possible you'll get yanked out of the seat in a way that you think is premature, but that some better painting is being painted that you'll fully understand later. Let me give you a specific outcome in this case. We developed some amazing leaders. Their exit from Popeyes was what we would now call a super spreader event.
And we all know what that means after
last year. We wouldn't have known that then.
Right.
But it was a super spreader. We put servant leaders all over the place in new companies, new growth companies that wanted to carry the principles of servant leadership forward and wanted that talent. And I couldn't be prouder. I mean, for me, the painting now is increasingly finished and beautiful in a way that I would not have been able to see in the moment, because there are more servant leaders going out in the world doing beautiful things. And I'm just pleased as punch. I had dinner with one of them last night, and he's leading another restaurant company, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
That is so great. That is so great. So you talk about doing the pieces, or maybe seeing a piece, but not seeing the whole. I want to drill into that a little bit. I think great leaders not only have bold visions and accomplish big things, but they actually do the little things well. Sometimes all it takes is for a leader to do something that, perhaps is small, but it just shows how much they care. I saw that happening in my leadership role. And you're a person that values people. Do you have any practices or anything that you kind of incorporate into your day-to-day, perhaps, that would be little, but would impact other people in perhaps a bigger way, or maybe something that happened to you along the lines of your career that somebody did that was little that meant a lot to you?
Well, I do love the question. I think maybe it's hard to know what your personal little things are.
Mm.
I did get an insight from a person I was working with, a colleague who came to tour the Popeyes office and meet my team and people one day, hadn't been there before. So I took him on a tour of the office. And at the end of the day, when we were debriefing the day, he said, "I want to draw something to your attention. I've never seen a CEO who had more eye contact and conversations with people as we walked around the building."
Mm.
And he said, "I wanted to draw that to your attention because I thought it was really unusual how many people called you by name, how many people you called by name, how many conversations occurred just in the course of us walking around." And on reflection, I said to him, I think that's true. And I think it's a value for me. I really wanted people to feel known. I really believe that if you're going to grow and develop people, you have to know them. And I wanted them to feel acknowledged and valued at every possible opportunity. So I'm not a superstar at remembering names and all that, but I love to know people.
Mm-hmm.
And I love them to feel recognized. And so that's probably the little thing that I did both intentionally and sometimes unknowingly, because I'm just so passionate about knowing and caring for people.
And it is hard, Cheryl. I know when you have thousands of people working for you, it is difficult. You can't know everybody by name, and you do forget names. And I was conscious of that as well. But you don't always have to remember the name. It's sort of the way that you act around them. And do you look them in the eye? I love that eye contact. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, eye contact in today's culture where everybody's staring at a device all day long, eye contact may be the most powerful little thing we can do to say, you are valuable to me. This conversation in this moment is valuable. I recently talked to a therapist who said, in a personal relationship, which is what work is, right? Or a home relationship with your spouse or children, the most valuable thing you can do is to gaze at them. Because it actually, the brain research says it builds those oxytocin, positive energy things in your brain, right? It's healthy for humans to acknowledge each other through eye contact and sincerely paying attention to one another. So one of my bosses called it being here now for people. Mm-hmm. I like that expression too, is to be fully present.
Boy, I love that. That's great. That's a good lesson. And I have one more question for you. And that is, I like to ask this of everybody. What are you most grateful for?
Well, it kind of is a full circle to the beginning of our conversation. I am most grateful for the generations of family and leaders that went before me, that prepared the way, that created, safe homes where education was valued and faith was valued and young people were raised up to do good work. And for great leaders in our world who took the mantle of stewarding countries or organizations or institutions and led well. It's on their great shoulders that my opportunities rest. And I'm most grateful for family and leaders of the past that have paved the way for me to do what I've been able to do in my lifetime.
All right. Well, that is an awesome ending. And I just want you to know, Cheryl, how awesome it's been to have you on. It's great to see you again. Hopefully we'll be able to see each other face to face in person down the road. But it's sure great to have you on. And I'd just like to thank you again for being here.
It's a pleasure.
I'd like to thank everybody else who joined us today. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about Cheryl's work, check out her website at CherylBachelder.com, CherylBachelder. Did I spell that right, Cheryl?
You did.
Okay, CherylBachelder.com. And of course, you'll find more about me and Transfluence on my website, WaltRakowich.com. Hopefully, I don't have to spell that at this point in time. I just ask everybody to keep an eye out for future LinkedIn Live streams. And until then, I encourage everyone to make sure that you're having a positive influence on those around you each and every day. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Cheryl. Have a great weekend.